Welcome to Creation Foundation, where we discuss the observable evidence as it relates to the biblical account of creation as recorded in the book of Genesis. I'm Dick Temple.
I'm Mark Finkbeiner.
And I'm Greg Morgan.
Today we're going to be discussing dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are an icon of evolution. In fact, they are such an effective icon of evolution that when people find out that I'm a young Earth six-day creationist, they frequently ask me, well, what about the dinosaurs? As if the dinosaurs in and of themselves were proof that the Earth is old and the six-day creation is false. Now, the reason that dinosaurs, the accurate history of the dinosaurs is important to us is that Christian students are not stupid. Parents should understand the correct, accurate history of the dinosaurs to explain that to their children, because anyone taking and reading the book of Genesis can see that the Bible history says that the land-dwelling dinosaurs were created on day 6. They coexisted with man until the global flood. At that time, God put pairs of dinosaurs on the ark. Then the dinosaurs coexisted with man again after Noah and his family came off of the ark. Now, if the evolutionary tale is true, then man and dinosaurs never lived together. Now, if the evidence shows that man and dinosaurs never lived together, then the Bible account is discredited. But if, on the other hand, the evidence shows that man and dinosaurs did live together, the Bible account is validated. Now, Mark, what's your take on the dinosaur history as far as it relates to our fellow Christians?
I've been teaching science for 5 years at a homeschool co-op group. It's called ECHO. And I teach 4 different classes, and each class probably has around 20 kids, 15 to 20 kids. And I have learned through experience that when I teach 5 and 6-year-olds, now I can't get this same reaction like I once did, because obviously the kids must be getting taught something right. But when I first started teaching, I asked this class of 5 and 6-year-olds, I said, name me some animals that God created. Oh, they would say, well, the lions, and the tigers, and the bears. And then I would ask them, okay, what kind of animals got on the ark? Oh, they would say, well, the lions, the tigers, and the bears, and, cats and dogs and frogs, and, all that kind of stuff. And then I asked them, did God create dinosaurs? And there was quiet, and all of a sudden they all said, no! And I says, wait a second here. You mean to tell me you believe that God created the lions, the tigers, and the bears, but he didn't create the dinosaurs? And I'll never forget this. One little girl, she says, because they went extinct. And another boy says, well, they were created millions of years ago. And I says, well, did God put dinosaurs on the ark? They says, no. Well, why? Well, because they lived millions of years ago. And I thought, you know what, this is really fascinating, because you got 5 and 6-year-olds, and they have never been told specifically that God never created the dinosaurs, but when they are taught by these TV shows, probably like Animal Planet and Discovery and whatever, and then, of course, they're probably being taught in books and magazines that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago and they died millions of years, 65 million years before man, automatically they think in their head, well, if they lived and died millions of years ago, then God could not have created them. Now, isn't that interesting? It's interesting how they make that disconnect automatically when they're just taught that they died millions of years ago, so therefore God could not have created them. And you see, that's why it is so important that we teach that dinosaurs, really, they're no different than any other animal. If you give it enough time, most all animals are going to go extinct. It's just that dinosaurs are generally, they're a bigger animal. They require more land surface, more food. And it could be, too, that their hearts were smaller. And so, therefore, they require more oxygen. They require more air pressure. And, of course, the bigger animals are the ones that always get hunted more. And so those are the ones that are going to go extinct. And, of course, it all depends, too, on how you define what a dinosaur is. Okay? And nobody really has a handle on that, especially if the evolutionists are saying, well, they died millions of years ago. Well, then how do you make a certain identification then as to what a dinosaur is? And so it all depends on how you define what a dinosaur is. I think that the reptiles, I think dinosaurs were reptiles, and I think if you see an alligator, a crocodile, or a lizard, those could be some of the last remaining dinosaurs.
Okay, yeah, as I understand it, their legs came down as compared to the lizards, crocodiles, etc. Their legs go out more laterally, which gives the Komodo dragon a son of a, is that really a dinosaur or is it really a lizard? What you have pointed out is very important to starting out with our children while they're quite young and give them the truth. You know, they read the secular books. When they talk about dinosaurs, they start out with millions of years ago. Well, the kids should realize that any time that something starts out with millions of years ago, a fairy tale is coming next. So what we need to do, get good children's books. Get a hold of places like Answers in Genesis, get some good books that are educational, and start out so they get the right presuppositions to start with. Now, Greg, you've personally investigated ancient dinosaur art. Could you tell us what a petroglyph is and what you've actually seen in your investigations?
Well, the petroglyphs are places where Native Americans and others have gone in and on the surface of rocks, they have chipped in to leave behind an image. Now, if they instead painted on that rock, that's called a petrograph. Petro, in both cases, means that it is on the rock, and glyph means chipped in, and graph means drawn or painted, just the same as people do graphs in their math classes. I was challenged by Dr. Dennis Swift, who wrote the book, The Secrets of the Ica Stones. At a creation conference, he challenged everyone there that as Christians we should expect to walk in the miraculous, and that we should pray and ask God to show us artifacts that show dinosaurs and men living together. I accepted that challenge. Over the years, he has indeed shown me several of them. One of the more interesting cases was that I went to Sego Canyon, which is about 4 miles north of Thompson Springs, Utah. 4 miles from the interstate, so it's easy to get to. There they have this panel of hundreds of images. Some of them are petrographs, some of them are petroglyphs. While I was there, my friend who was with me really was interested in this particular image right here, which is a petroglyph, and it shows chipped in some kind of a strange animal. An animal with a club on the end of the tail, with spikes all on it, a fairly long neck. I wasn't convinced that was actually an image of a dinosaur, but I took the photograph, and a lady walked up and wondered, out of all these hundreds of images, why were we so interested in that one? I didn't want to just drop on her what I thought, so I asked, well, have you ever heard of the sauropod that's found in Natural Bridges National Monument? And I explained to her that under the Kachina Bridge, in Natural Bridges, there's this sauropod. It's chipped in and has a very long tail, which curves, a large body, 4 legs, and a neck that stretches out here. And on the end of the neck, you find the head with an eye, and she's actually smiling. And no, she had never heard of that image before. It's interesting that when I visited there, not only do you have that, but the people who argue against creation say that, well, it's connected to this image and it's connected to this image, and it's just a misshapen thing that we think looks like a sauropod. Well, it looks an awful lot like a sauropod to me, but I looked carefully, and no, it is not connected to any of these other images. But they shouldn't have attracted our attention to it. Christy Schweiger, who was there with me, said, well, this one that they say is connected is not, but that looks like a baby dinosaur looking at its mother. And if you look carefully, that's just what it is, out of the mouths of babes. It's got a long tail, a body with 4 legs, and the neck stretches around here, comes up, and there's 2 eyes and the nostrils. So actually, by criticizing this, the evolutionists got us to look carefully, and now we know that there are 2 sauropods there, not just 1. So there's 2 dinosaurs there. I went on to ask her if she had ever heard of the pterosaur in Black Dragon Canyon, 17 miles west of Green River, Utah, about 3 miles north of the interstate. It's actually labeled now as Black Dragon Wash. There on the side of one of the cliffs is a pterosaur. Now, it's not a pterodactyl. If you look down here, you find that it has webbed feet, which pterodactyls had claws, but the pterosaurs, which is the broad group, many of them had webbed feet. About 85% of them had webbed feet. This one has a nice head crest, very long wings. It's 8 feet wide on the canyon wall. And here you find 3 claws on this wing and at least 1 claw on this wing. Not only that, but it has something that we didn't really know about for a while. On the end of the tail, there's actually a small vein or barb. But again, something that scientists didn't know about until very recently. Notice on the front of that wing, there's a flap that goes up. On the front of this wing, there are 2 flaps that go up. And scientists in 2006 published an article, the Royal Society published an article, that showed that indeed they could reach out with their, what they call a pteroid bone on their wing, they could flip it forward, and it raised that flap on the front of the wing. That gives them about 35% more wing area, so we can take off easier. I wish that I had had that when I was flying. But as we were talking about that, we began to walk across the canyon, and I told her that we were out there looking for any other images that might look like dinosaurs. And we walked across the canyon, and I looked up and said, some images like maybe that. And I pointed at this image right here. That image is between these strange-looking humans, but there it is, and it has a body with 4 legs, and the front legs are smaller than the back legs. It's got a long whipped tail, and comes over here, and it's got a head crest. Now, what animal looks like that? I went to the Creation Museum outside Cincinnati, and I purchased this. It's a hadrosaur dinosaur. This particular one, it is a Parasaurolophus. They have the eye in the right place, they have the right head crest, the correct legs. That is a very good image of this hadrosaur dinosaur. While we were looking at that, the lady asked, but what's this down here in this, where this man's feet are? And we looked carefully. It looks remarkably like a penguin. Now you might wonder why we're going to talk about penguins when we're talking about dinosaurs. Well, we're not just talking about dinosaurs, we're talking about the Bible is accurate. We're upholding the accuracy of the Bible. And penguins do not belong in eastern Utah, where this was found. But the evolutionists can't explain this at all. But after the dispersion of the Tower of Babel, people ran away from there. Some of them took livestock with them. They could easily have taken penguins for their meat, for their eggs, and for their very warm feathers. So this is consistent with the Bible. They could also have gone there just on their own, natural dispersion after the flood as the populations increased. But in eastern Utah, don't they need water? Well, at that time in eastern Utah, right here, at Sego Canyon, there was something called Grand Lake. It spread all the way from southern Utah, spread up into this area, and all the way into Colorado. So it's all consistent. The Bible's consistent, the artifacts are consistent with the Bible, and it does say that indeed Grand Lake was there, just as Dr. Stephen Austin and others, including Walt Brown, have found. So we find that it's all really very consistent. But as I said, I wasn't sure that this chipped-in image was truly a dinosaur until later, when I got a model of one of the dinosaurs with its club on the tail, and indeed it does match. And in fact, there is a particular species of this that has these spikes are below the neck, just as this shows spikes below the neck. I've got this particular photo with me there because we found something that I hadn't seen while I was there. This image right here, the petrograph painted on here. Now, for the children who are watching PBS now, doesn't that look a lot like Barney, the purple dinosaur? For those of us who grew up a little bit before that, such as myself, the Flintstones had a little pet named Dino, and that looks a lot like him too. This is a sauropod dinosaur in Sego Canyon. So in Sego Canyon, you have this sauropod dinosaur, this club-tailed dinosaur, and right across the canyon is the hadrosaur, and it turns out there are 4 penguins, not just the one that we found that day, but when I took Dr. Bakavoy back there, we found 3 more. And interestingly, this one has an effect that shows that the Native Americans were smarter than we think they were. They were not stupid people. They were not primitive. This bill somehow optically comes out of the wall about 3 inches. They knew more about how light behaves than I do. And somehow in the way they chipped that image into the rock and then outlined it in black, which does a very good job of showing that it has a black back, by the way, but the way they carved that, they made the beak come out of the wall about 6 inches, 3 to 6 inches optically, just like some people do with their 3D images for movies. And so I would like to end this with the same challenge that I received from Dr. Swift. Everyone listening to this, at least all those who are Christians, we should expect to walk in the miraculous. And I challenge you to pray Ask God to show you images like this, show you artifacts. I'm reasonably certain that the Northwest has some artifacts just as the Southwest has. And I'd like you to pray about it, ask God to show it to you, and when he does show it to you, either contact Radiant Light and let them know where it is. We'd be glad to follow up on that. Or contact Dr. Dennis Swift. He can be found at dinosaursinman.com, and he'd be very glad to reveal this at one of his creation conferences in Portland.
Dinosaurs, being reptilian, tend to live in the warmer climates. Just mark how far north and south do we find remains of dinosaurs?
Well, we find them all the way from the North Pole to the South Pole, from the Arctic to the Antarctic. There has been teams of scientists that have gone up north of Alaska into the Arctic Circle, and they have found dinosaur bones, lots of them. And then there has been some reports, and this comes from, these are secular magazines. One is Science Daily, dated February 9th, 1998. And here's an article they came up with. It says, a team of Argentinian and U.S. scientists has found fossils of duck-billed dinosaur along with remains of Antarctica's most ancient bird and an array of giant marine reptiles on Vega Island off the eastern side of the Antarctic Peninsula. And then there was another expedition in February 27, 2004. Let's see, against incredible odds, researchers working in separate sites thousands of miles apart in Antarctica have found what they believe are the fossilized remains of two species of dinosaurs previously unknown to science. So see, the scientists are always finding new dinosaurs. There's a huge variety of them, and it's interesting because Antarctica is a desert. It gets 2 inches of precipitation less than the Sahara Desert annually. The Antarctic is 5.5 million square miles. It's the 5th biggest continent in the world. And they're finding dinosaur bones in the sedimentary layers. Now, can you imagine that? There's actually sedimentary layers that they can find that's under the ice. Now, sedimentary layers are created by dirt filtering out through water. And so we would say that the flood definitely, it covered the whole Earth. It covered it all the way from the South Pole to the North Pole. The sedimentary layers are laid down that way by either dirt filtering out through water or through turbidites. They're called turbidity currents or underwater landslides. And I've been on 3 dinosaur digs. Dinosaur bones can be found almost anywhere, and it's a little bit difficult to find them in the Pacific Northwest because we've got all these basalt flows and they've covered over everything. So there could be even dinosaur bones right here in the state of Washington. It's just that we'll never know it because we've got too much basalt on the ground.
You've raised some issues here. Dinosaur bones in Antarctica, dinosaur bones in Alaska. Along with that, the vegetation that's found with them is tropical vegetation.
Correct. Yes.
So one of the things that is important is here's what was the climate back then, and actually the global flood explains the warm climate. When the global flood occurred, the fountains of the great deep were opened up, as the scripture says. We had volcanoes. You know, the volcano puts out a tremendous amount of ash, but it also puts out a tremendous amount of water vapor. And this is where much of the water for the flood, global flood came from, is from the volcanoes. Now this stuff coming out is hot. By the time the global flood was over, the oceans were far warmer than they are today, so that we had a Mediterranean climate worldwide. So that would allow the transport of various animals all over the world along the continents. However, before the global flood, we had a Mediterranean climate worldwide, far more land mass and not near as much water mass, so that with the water vapor canopy over the top of the earth, as described in the first part of the first chapter of Genesis, we would have a global warming situation, and north and south we would have exactly the climate that we would expect for dinosaurs. It's why we can find dinosaur remains all over the earth. Also, you have seen dinosaur tracks, or at least would like to tell us something about them?
This is really controversial, and I've been doing a lot of research on this on both sides of the story. You know, the evolutionists, of course, they will not accept this, and there's many scientists, And of course, I call scientists creationists because if you're a creationist, you are a scientist. If you're a scientist, that means you believe in creation. So I like to just say scientists. Anyway, there has been a lot of human footprints and dinosaur footprints found in Texas, preferably more around the Paluxy River. And I've been to the Paluxy River and I've seen the dinosaur footprints. There was a man by the name of Alvis Delk several years ago. In fact, it was in July 2000. He was out looking for arrowheads along a river that feeds into the Paluxy River bed. And now you might be able to see the pictures on the camera, and it's a human footprint and a dinosaur footprint, but the dinosaur footprint stepped on the human footprint, okay? And you can tell that it is definitely not a carving. Now, of course, when you talk to the evolutionists, they always say it's a carving. They will always say it's a fake. They will never believe that it's the real thing. But there has been CT scans of this print, and it has been verified. In fact, I've got one of the quotes here from the person who did the CT or the CAT scans on it, and this is what he said. This is Dr. Charles Meyers. He said, "Something compressed that rock," said Dr. Charles Meyers, head of the radiology unit at Paleo Pinto General Hospital, who on Thursday reviewed CAT scan images, digital high-tech x-rays of the stone. Displacement caused by stepping. I totally agree with that. I think that is conceivable. Now, of course, the evolutionists, they come back and they say that, well, you know, he's not qualified, he's not a geologist, he's not a paleontologist, how could he know this for sure? Well, the only way he's going to be qualified, according to the evolutionists, is if the geologist or the paleontologist is an evolutionist. Some people will say, well, it was counterfeit. Well, there has been some human footprints that have been counterfeited, but you can always tell when they're not counterfeited, because if it's a real impression, the weight of the foot is going to compress the mud. Now, this is in limestone, and if you've ever been around limestone, it's so hard, it's almost impossible to carve it without it being very obvious, because the impressions, they are perfectly round, and not only that, but the mud comes up between the toes, okay? And so there's a lot of reasons why we know that this is not a fake, it is the real thing. Back, I believe it was 1990, don't quote me on that, but it was a while back. There was a T-Rex, some T-Rex bones that were found in Montana in the Hell Creek Formation, and the evolutionists say, well, they're 70 million years old. Well, it just turns out that when they were digging up these bones, that one of the bones broke in half, and lo and behold, they found soft tissue in the bones. And then under a microscope, they actually found what looked like hemoglobin and red blood cells in the bones. And here is an article. Now, this comes from National Geographic. This is like one of the top-line evolution magazines right here. This is what they say. A Tyrannosaurus rex fossil has yielded what appear to be the only preserved soft tissues ever recovered from a dinosaur, taken from a 70-million-year-old thigh bone. The structures look like the blood vessels, cells, and proteins involved. I like that word, involved. In other words, they were in the bone formation. Most fossils preserve in organisms hard tissues, such as shell or bone. Finding preserved soft tissue is unheard of in a dinosaur age specimen. To my knowledge, preservation to this extent where you still have original flexibility and transparency has not been noted in dinosaurs before. So we are pretty excited by the find, said Mary H. Schweitzer, and she is the one who at Montana State University has done all the investigation on these dinosaur bones with the soft tissues in it. She's a paleontologist at North Carolina State University. The findings may provide new insights into dinosaur evolution, physiology, or biochemistry. They could also increase our understanding of extinct life and change how scientists think about the fossilization process. No, what they need to rethink is their ages right? How do you get hemoglobin, blood cells, soft tissue in a bone that is supposed to be 70 million years old? It could be that their ages are wrong, but they'll never give that up, of course, because if they give that up and they believe in a young Earth, well, then they automatically become a scientist. Finding these tissues in dinosaurs changes the way we think about fossilization, because our theories of how fossils are preserved don't allow for this soft tissue preservation. Yes, that's exactly right. The evolutionist is straitjacketed. He has to believe a certain way. He cannot be open-minded to the fact that, hey, you know what, maybe our dating methods are wrong. After all, the geologic column was invented before there was even any dating methods. And then there was an MSN News report by John Horner. Now, John Horner is one of the supposedly top paleontologists and dinosaur bone diggers in the world. And this is what he said. He's the curator of the museum at the Rockies in Montana State University. And he said the discovery is a fantastic specimen, but probably is not unique. Aha! Other researchers might find similarly preserved soft tissues if they split open the bones in their collections, said Horner, a co-author of the paper. Now, yes, that is right. There are lots of museums now that are going to their basements where they have all their dinosaur bones, and guess what? They're cutting open their dinosaur bones, and they are finding soft tissue in their dinosaur bones. They've even found it in salamander bones, which is amazing.
I'd like to report what the Russians said before Glasnost about the Turkmenistan trackways. In Turkmenistan, there are hundreds of dinosaur prints, goat prints, some other prints, and barefoot human prints out on a desert floor. The Russians, when they first observed it and reported it, and remember, to say something that confirms creation would be absolutely devastating back at that time in Russia, much like as it is if you're a professor here in the United States today. The first report came out and they said, if these tracks are real, then that pushes the evolution of man back 150 million years. Several years later, Pravda magazine came out with a report and again confirming the accuracy of the prints being there together, and said that it's obvious that extraterrestrials were walking along the beach in their swimsuits. I find that hilarious. You know, when we come to a point that there is no other explanation other than creation, other than something consistent with creation, extraterrestrials are brought in. You know, I believe in extraterrestrials. There's God the Father, Jesus the Son, there's the Holy Spirit, and there's a whole bunch of angels. You know, those are the extraterrestrials I believe in. Now, you guys have covered physical evidence about man and dinosaurs living together, because these various artifacts you're talking about would not exist if people hadn't actually seen the dinosaurs. However, if we go into history, we can find the same sort of thing. In fact, I'll just mention a few. Pliny in 70 AD wrote a zoology book in which he mentioned the dinosaurs. Jordanus in 550 AD also, he wrote about wonders of the East and mentioned dinosaurs. Of course, the word was dragons at that time. Gesner in 1585 to 1587 produced the Historia Animalium, in which he recorded every known and mythical animal he could find, but his report on dinosaurs was a factual report, not like the report of unicorn, for instance. He said dinosaurs are fewer in number and smaller than they have been in the past. Then just recently, I was talking to Paul Veit, who has just purchased a page from a book on natural science and herbals that was printed in 1508. In this, the page he has talks about the cave bear, the crocodile, and the Draco, and it shows a picture of a dinosaur very much like the second one that you showed, if you want to hold that up for the camera. A picture is very much like that picture right there. We have the history and we have personal sightings, but no one's going to believe if you saw a dinosaur. I saw a cougar in Wallowa County in 1954. No one would believe I saw a cougar. Cougars were extinct, but 2 years later, people believed me when a cougar was shot right there. You show up with a real dinosaur, people won't believe you. So what we need to do is very carefully examine the evidence. Look at the real evidence for what it says, and you'll find that it matches up. The Bible is the truth from the Creator of the universe.